If anything illustrates the point that the pattern is just the beginning, it's this one. I'm making the March dress by Helen's Closet, and I'd like to take advantage of the construction to use 2 different fabrics. Contrasting? Complementary? Both? I have 2 meters each of a cotton with a sun and moon pattern and a solid brown to match that I'd bought for a different shirt entirely. I know I'll have enough of the cotton, but if the brown won't work out, I do have some other solid colored fabric in the stash that could sub in. If you're just joining me, hi, I'm Mare and I'm making some much needed basics. A couple of recent family events have stressed to me the need to have more than yoga pants, t-shirts, and hoodies in my wardrobe, and I can't think of a better way to restock that wardrobe than to make the clothes myself. Hopefully in fabrics that I like and that are comfortable to wear. Seriously, I love living in an age where larger plus sizes can go into a retail store and find what they need in a hurry, but I often feel like I'm at the mercy of someone else when it comes to the fabric choices. They like a lot of thin plastic-feeling fabrics, and I like my clothing built a bit more sturdy. I also love being able to use my own color sense or choose patterned fabrics with a sense of whimsy, and that can be rare at your local plus-size shop. At its most basic, the March dress is a tunic dress with gathered sleeves and a gathered skirt. I saw a fantastic photo on Instagram by Tammy.handmade where she used 2 different fabrics with the same pattern to make a truly unique looking dress. I'm hoping I have enough fabric here to do something similar. Speaking of buying fabric, I'd like to thank my patrons without whom I wouldn't be able to splurge on fabric like this. I've heard rumors that quilting cottons are much cheaper in the States, but here in Canada, they are expensive. Heck, everything in Canada is getting expensive, but fabric, particularly printed cotton, is right up there. Personally, I think Fabricland's just trying to make bank off a bunch of desperate quilters, and I'm not sure if that's brilliant or shameful, probably both. I'd also like to thank my viewers because you contribute to purchases like these too. I'd love it if you could watch to the end, maybe subscribe if you aren't already, possibly boop the like button. If you'd like to leave a comment, I would love to hear about any colorful or multi-fabric projects you've worked on or seen in the wild. I traced my pattern pieces using my second-hand Epson Ultra Short Throw projector. It saves on printer ink and time spent taping paper together. Seriously, you can spend an entire 2 days printing, taping, and cutting out a single printed home pattern, so I'm glad there are other options available. I'm tracing my pattern onto tissue, but I've also used old wrapping paper that's been lingering for years because it was the dud pattern that came in a multi-pack. I'm tracing rather than cutting out directly because I don't have a large enough cutting mat, and I'm taller than the stated size the dress was designed for, so I may need to do some adjusting. Besides, having a paper pattern available is handy in case you need to go back to the pattern for any reason, like checking for markings you forgot, or retrimming a hem that stretched on the bias, stuff like that. I checked the solid brown fabric and there's not enough to make the dress with the pieces that I need to cut. I decided to dip into the stash and used a black linen I picked up sometime last year. It looks like it'll pair really well with the cotton. Cue the cutting out montage. I noticed the skirt panels were just basic gathered panels, so rather than waste that extra couple of inches between the end of the panel and the selvage, I'm just going to include it and gather it down. Slightly fuller skirts are okay by me. I also used my generic huge pocket template based on the stitchery purse pocket hack I made for my coquelicot skirt. Hooray for standardizing pockets. The instructions call for interfacing on both front and back panels as well as the front neck opening. I knew my material was sturdy enough it would only really benefit from interfacing at the neck. Otherwise, I think the dress may have been a bit too warm during summer wear. I may revise this opinion if I need extra structure on a future version of the dress. I just used a scrap of white cotton as my interfacing rather than using fusible. Aside from that, I mostly followed the pattern. After attaching the interfacing to the main dress front, I stay-stitched the necklines and set about assembling the panels. Once the front and back panels were attached to the shoulder, I turned the edges inward and pressed. I attached the main front and back pieces at the shoulders and laid both the main body pieces and the panels, which, sorry, I keep thinking bib instead of panel. I laid all the pieces wrong side up, matching notch marks, and pinned the neck and neck opening. After marking the neck opening, I sewed everything up and clipped around the seams to reduce bulk. Then I turned it right sides out like some kind of floppy origami. After top stitching the edges of the panels, we have the hardest part of the bodice done. Oh, it's a kitten. You're cute. Are you going to stay off the ironing board in my desk today? All signs point to no? Alright, you can go that way. So for you guys, it's only been a couple of moments. For me, it's been the better part of 2 weeks, I think, since I got back from Regina. I finished off the Coquelicot skirt and immediately went into editing 3 videos. So the Coquelicot skirt video, which was supposed to be first, is now the 3rd, and it's going live on Saturday. So I need a better process. What can I say? This is where we left off. I had finished off working the main motif of the bodice, and I found out afterwards, looking at it, that my pattern, I think, is upside down, but it really doesn't matter because, sure, other people will be looking at me, but I'm going to be looking down at myself, and it's going to look the right way around to me, so I'm okay with it. If somebody's looking that closely at my chest, I think we've got other problems. Maybe the next time I rework the blouse, like if I cut it down a little bit, what I may do is either take some of the leftover fabric and put it the right way around, or the other option is I may put a different fabric entirely on there. Who knows? I might even keep an eye out around Halloween and see if more of this fabric comes out, because this is a pattern that I've seen a couple of years in a row now. One of the other things, apparently I did the neckline, I'm not going to say wrong, just the wrong view. I had meant to have the ties at the neck closure, and unfortunately I got a little confused and wound up turning in at the neck. So what I'm probably going to do is take some bias, the way that they suggest to do in the first place, and just put the ties in manually. It's probably not going to look the same as it would if the raw edges of the neck were up where they were supposed to be, but it'll do. Now, according to the instructions, what we're supposed to do is put together the sleeves today. So put in the gathering stitches at the top and at the cuff of the sleeves, and then seam up the sleeve side and bodice side. So it's kind of a T. What I'm thinking of doing is putting the pockets on the skirt and seaming up the skirt, and that way what we can do is we can do the gathering stitches for both the skirt and the sleeves at the same time. And that way we don't have to keep monkeying around with the settings on the sewing machine. Get all of the basting stitches done at once. I don't remember if I mentioned it when I was cutting out or even planning the March dress, but I'm not using the standard pockets that came with the March dress. I'm actually using a mashup of the Helen's Closet pocket with the enlarged Coquelicot skirt pocket that I was using with the Winslow culottes as well. This huge big thing, the main place where you can see the alteration is right here. That's where it sews into the edge of the skirt. As I may have mentioned, the skirt is a little bit larger, or at least will be a little bit more gathered than the standard skirt, because when I was cutting everything out, I realized there were only a couple more inches to the selvage and went, why not? So it just means that my skirt's going to be a tiny bit fuller. So we'll see how this goes. We'll sew in the pockets and sew up the skirt. One of the other things is you could probably even hem up the skirt while I'm at it once everything is put together. I will probably serge around the sides of my pockets so that I'm not getting a lot of fraying. I have to be honest, I am really surprised that the linen and the cotton have held up as well as they have with all of the moving around of stuff around here. Usually by now I would be finding little fibers all over the place, and I'm not. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to serge those. I'm going to see if I can get the pockets into the skirt, get the skirt put together, and then from there we'll see where we can go. If we get to putting in the gathering stitches on the sleeves, fantastic. If we don't, it might be something to do tomorrow or the next day. Hopefully tomorrow. I'd like tomorrow to be another sewing day instead of a day outside of the house doing other things. So, just gonna get to it. My serging adventures often involve me testing to see if the serger is still working, then serging a few centimeters before it inevitably quits on me. Then I go through a good 10 to 15 minutes of playing tech support for myself, which isn't such a big deal considering I worked in internet technical support for the better part of 20 years. It's just highly inconvenient. And of course, now I'm passing my serger breakdown on to you. I love my older hand-me-down machines, but the serger has been so consistently inconsistent that I'm considering saving for a brand new model with a warranty. So when it inevitably breaks, I can get someone else to fix it for once. Plus, this serger is still a bit gummy and smells vaguely of nicotine despite cleaning the full surface and as much of the inside as I safely could, and I'm not sure it will ever not have those issues. My one worry is that someday I'll find it's transferred some of those traits onto something I sew, and that would be the last straw. And incredibly heartbreaking. All this to say, I highly recommend giving gently used machines a home, and that's usually my policy, but if I splurge on a new serger, don't come at me. Once the pocket pieces were serged, I attached them to the skirt panels. I used what I've come to think of as the standard method of pocket installation. One piece per side of panel, front corresponding to back, so that when you eventually sew them together, they match up. You sew the pocket piece to the skirt right sides together, press open, and I've heard the term understitch used, but I think this is actually a top stitch near the seam to keep the pocket lying flat. Then you match up the front panel to the back panel and seam all the way along the side edge, including the pocket. I generally try to mark my seam allowances with chalk or friction pen so I'm not making a mess of my seam. If you use the Helen's Closet pocket pieces, Pay attention to her directions, because she uses 2 pieces folded over on one side rather than my 4-piece pocket, if that makes sense. I transferred markings from her pocket pattern to mine because you don't leave the whole edge of the pocket open at the seam. You sew an extension on the side seam so there's enough room to fit your hand in, but you're not risking things falling out of your pockets. Once the skirt was seamed, I hemmed it. It's one of the benefits of working with squares and panels on the grain. You don't have to worry about bias stretch. One of the other benefits? By hemming now, I don't have to maneuver the rest of the dress around with the skirt. Last, I ran gathering stitches in both front and back of the skirt as well as the tops and bottoms of the sleeves. I like that Helen specifies the distances to run the basting stitches so your seam line falls smack dab in the middle between the basting stitches, which you then pull out once the seam is in place. While my mum did a pretty good job of teaching me the basics of sewing, that's not a technique I learned. Usually the recommendation was to run the stitches within the seam allowance and just leave them there. I think I like this method better. The gathers are a bit easier to control, look a lot neater, and the long tails from gathering aren't trying to poke out the seams. Of course, if I have to regather the skirt for a smaller size down the line, I'll have to do a full iron and regather, but it's really not that big a deal. How fantastic is this? I actually got everything done yesterday that I wanted to get done, so we are ready to ruffle. Pins, I need pins. I choose you. It's the back side. Those are the ones that I actually want to pull. Ruffling things is a lot of work. I would have done the zigzagging over the cord solution again, but I only have a certain amount of cord and I don't want to use it all up on ruffling a dress. So here we are. The nice thing about this is that it means that I am just a step closer to getting this project done. Not that I really want it to be, over or anything. I'm actually enjoying working on this particular dress. So that's cool. I hope it fits. I think it's going to look pretty when it's done. One of the things I'm considering right now, because when I first started cutting out all of my pieces, I cut out my sleeve and my cuffs and the bias that's going to turn into ties around the collar. I cut them all out of this fabric, and I'm actually thinking I kind of want some contrast. So I may be going back to what's left of my linen and cut those out in black so that there's a black cuff and the tie that goes around the neck is black. And that will hopefully make things a little bit swankier. I like being able to customize my stuff. I really do. And it's not something I ever thought I'd hear myself say, but it makes sense. It really does. I mean, if it came down to it, if we all made the same stuff, we really wouldn't have any individuality, right? And it really does go to show that the pattern really is just the beginning. And now that I've been sewing for a couple of years, that really does resonate with me. There are things that I know now that I didn't when I was first getting started, and I think it explains so much of my ambivalence toward the pattern industry. And it's something that I don't think a lot of beginners really get through their heads. They see the pattern, they think, I gotta make that, and then we kind of make the pattern as close to the pictures as possible. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates me about the big four, is I used to get really uptight about them for whatever we're calling simplicity, Vogue, whatever, about having them not make plus size patterns. And they've gotten to be a lot better about it. Vogue still doesn't. I mean, for the most part, Simplicity, McCall's have gotten a lot more better about it, and I'll give them kudos for that. But I keep hearing and seeing that some of their lines only feature very boxy tent-like fashions for plus-size people, while the straight-sized analog is more tailored and fitted. And I continue to be disappointed in the amount of example pictures that they take. I mean, is the one picture that we get of the front and the back the be-all and end-all of the versatility, or could we maybe get example photos of the other pattern views? maybe on a plus size model, maybe show both the plus and the straight sizes where available, and have the plus size actually be adjusted to fit the plus size model with the instructions in the pattern on how to do it, so that we can make it look as good as a straight size model with a bit of tweaking, instead of showing saggy, baggy, boxy dresses on a barely plus size model. Because I think a lot of us buy the patterns thinking that if we make it in the right size to our measurements, it's going to look the same as the straight-sized model in the one picture set, and it's very rarely the case. And it's one of the reasons why I'm actually really enjoying looking for independent designers. Yeah, the patterns tend to be a bit more expensive, but if they have expanded size ranges and either include pictures of the various sizes and views, or have an Instagram where they can highlight differently sized people, maybe individual stylings and hacks, perfect. One of the things I've noticed about myself is that while I was a pretty fair hourglass when I was younger and in better shape, I've kind of gone pear-shaped in the past few years, and I'm definitely carrying a lot more junk in my trunk and my tummy, and that's something that can happen when you're a morbidly obese woman of a certain age. The fat's gotta go somewhere, right? I mean, I'm living in a three-dimensional space, only so much of it can go on my sides. Some of it has to go front and back. But I see patterns where the assumption is that someone near the top of the pattern sizes should have a waist that corresponds to the same ratio as the bust, waist, and hip of a straight-sized person. And while I've had times where I've looked at myself straight on in the mirror and I've seen my waist curve in, when I took my measurements, my bust was the same as my waist due to the weight packed on my tummy. Kind of disappointing, right? Is there information in the pattern on how to do a full stomach adjustment? Of course not. They assume that you're actually going to know how to do that yourself because, you know, when you're fat, you know all about how to sew, right? Luckily, I've got the books by the gal who puts out cashmerette patterns, but, you know, if you'd asked me about 2 or 3 years ago how I'm supposed to adjust anything for the fact that I've got a huge tummy, it's like, I'm sorry, you don't just download that information from the Fat Network to your head, right? And going back to the big 4 patterns, is there information in the pattern assuring you that the waist and the hip won't matter as much as the bust if you style it the right way? No. One thing I like about Helen's closet now that I'm within her size range is the patterns have information on how to adjust between the sizes, or whether there's a lot of ease in the hips so that measurement matters less than, say, the bust and over bust. I also like that she includes multiple photos of the completed garments with differently sized models, and there are hacks for making adjustments and alterations on her blog. You want to mash together 2 different patterns to make a secret pants pinafore? She's got you covered. Don't like zippers and want flexibility in the back of your gathered back pants? Try some elastic. She's got the info publicly available, and most of it is common sense and stuff that you probably wouldn't think of unless you were an experienced sewist. The elastic back Winslow culottes I made fit beautifully. I'm wondering if that's one of the secrets to being long-waisted, is you have to add a little bit of length in the top, but your bottom half fits like you're 5'6", even though you're 5'8". I'm still trying to figure all of this out. But going beyond that, it's been great seeing what other folks have been doing with their patterns via Instagram. I've seen how people choose their patterns or choose fabrics or do piecework to highlight the area with seams that lends itself to color blocking. It really does fire up the imagination. A lot of the patterns I've chosen to work with are pretty basic in their construction, but I don't think I'd really describe any of them as saggy, baggy, or boxy. The March dress is probably the one built off the most squares and rectangles, and due to the way it's put together, the pictures show a very charming dress. I'm hoping mine comes out half as pretty as some of the examples I've seen. It's certainly going to look more like me. I mean, is all lost for the big 4? I'd like to hope not. I've been seeing some awesome new designs by folks who are new to me, and I'm liking what I see. Aronica B. Cole, for example, from what I've been seeing, she designs clothes she wants to wear for herself, and if anyone is rocking the plus-size sexy market right now, it's her. I mean, I wish I had 1/10 of her body confidence. These ruffles are not going to ruffle themselves. Gathering on the whole really isn't a huge problem. Find something fun to listen to or watch out of the corner of your eye and pull the threads until the long piece can fit in the short piece. The March dress is fun, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. If you gather your bits and pieces correctly, everything fits together in the end. After gathering the tops and bottoms of the sleeves, you attach them to the bodice and seam up the sides. I think we're on day 4 now. That sounds about right. Have you had your water today? Because water is good. I know this is yellow. It's kind of a disturbing color of yellow. It's water with country time flavoring in it. If you haven't had your water for today, go and get some. And if you're in an area where you're having a water shortage, still stay hydrated because you need to. Calgary right now is under water restriction because we had a water main break a couple of weeks back. It's made it difficult to shower and to do laundry and to do dishes. I mean, we've been told that most of household water usage is okay, but they'd like us to keep it reasonable. And a lot of people don't. The one thing that I don't skimp on is filling up my Brita. The Brita gets filled up and the Country Time lemonade or the Kool-Aid Tropical Punch goes into the water bottle. And if you haven't noticed, I'm wearing the Laser-On blouse. I managed to get all of the things fixed that I thought needed fixing. So neckline is altered, everything is sewed in properly. I even finished off the underarm seams. The one thing I don't like is the shoulders. Still, the poof is just not right, and I think I've figured out that the sleeve just isn't big enough. So next time I make this blouse, what I will probably do is just enlarge the sleeve. I think Closet Historian has some information on how to do that. I think she made a peasant top at some point. So what I'll do is I'll grab that information and just make the sleeve a little bit bigger, and hopefully that will fix whatever's going on in the sleeve cap, because I noticed that the sleeve is trying to poof, but then it's like it's getting sucked in at the biceps. So I think that the sleeve is just not big enough up in that upper arm area for me. Easily fixed. I'll do that at some point. Probably not with this particular blouse. I think this is probably fine for now. Besides, I'd have to go and get more fabric to do the sleeves. I managed to fix this without having to recut my sleeves or anything, which was nice because I've only got a very little bit of fabric left. And I'm not sure what I want to do with that. Maybe make like a little purse or something to go with the shirt. Who knows? Today's stuff that needs to be done, I need to gather the skirt and attach it to the bodice, and I need to put the cuffs on. I'm kind of two minds when it comes to color blocking the cuff. In other words, making the cuff out of the black fabric rather than the same colored fabric that I've got here. Reason being that putting the black cuff on will provide a stopping place for the eye on the cuff, whereas using the same color is going to give the illusion of a longer sleeve. Where it comes to the ties around the neckline, what I think I'm going to do is use the black, and that will provide a little bit of extra cover for that top stitching around the edge. Hopefully that'll do the trick. Right now it's more me trying to cover up something that I just don't like. And that's okay. So I'm going to get back to it and we'll see if we can get this done today. Let's continue on from yesterday when we sewed up the bodice. Of course you press out your seams, and I'm aware I didn't French seam the bodice or serge the sleeves. I'm okay with the raw edges here. If it really bothers me, I'll fix that when I eventually alter it for size. If it makes you feel better, I serged the seam allowance at the shoulder once the sleeves were sewn in and pressed. You press the necessary folds in the cuff and seam it at the short ends. Then attach the cuff to the sleeves. I chose to attach my cuffs right side to right side with the sleeve, turned the cuff to the inside and hand stitched in place. You can top stitch if you prefer, but I find I prefer hand stitching. If I want the look of top stitching, I usually do that after I know everything is secure. I was very lucky to find some closely matching thread in the stash. Looks possibly vintage too. No idea what it was originally bought for. Most of Mum's threads were turquoises, teals, and fuchsias as they were the colors she preferred. For all I know, this packed a jacket for Dad or something. Once the cuffs were done, I repeated the gathering process for the skirt to the bodice, and once again serged the edge. I did eventually press the seam out, for those of you who might be bothered by a lack of seam pressage. After that, I put together some bias tape from a wide strip of leftover linen and bound the neckline. I suspect they prefer you bind the raw edge because it's easier to navigate the curve of the neck than binding the finished edge. Either way, I managed to bind the edge fairly well and used top stitching to not only tack down the binding, but finish the ties made by the ad hoc bias tape. And because I find top stitching to be a dodgy way to tack down the bias strip on the inside, I then went and hand stitched all the little sections where the needle went over the edge or completely missed the other side of the tape. Whatever. It's properly secured. And with that, we're off to the reveal. The world decided to get really noisy all of a sudden. Every single bird in the neighborhood decided they needed to come out for this. So it's very possible I'll have to re-record this again downstairs in the basement. I think everybody's coming home from work too. All I can hear are cars and birds in the wind. The wind is the nicest part of this. That better not be an ant climbing up my tights. I had everything all planned out in my head of what I was going to say, and now it's just kind of gone poof. Maybe it's just because it's nice and cool down here in the basement. Okay, so she's a hot one outside. If you have any measures that you can take to keep yourself cool, take them. I mean, I know that we're probably not as hot as, say, parts east and locations in the United States, but it's still warm when you are a hothouse flower who turns into a crispy critter within 5 minutes of leaving the house. I waited all day for the sun to get to just the right point so that I could go out and shoot in the driveway because it was probably going to be the place where I felt the coolest to do so. And I don't really have a problem filming myself in the driveway. I've filmed myself on my mother-in-law's front patio where all of her neighbors could see, so what's a few more suburban folk who take a look out the window and see a girl with a witch hat gallivanting around her driveway. The dress is fantastic. This is not the first time I have worn it. I finished it off on Saturday, I think, Friday or Saturday, and I wore it Sunday to a family member's retirement party. We saw a private screening of The Empire Strikes Back at a local theater, and then went off to a local venue for a buffet and video games because I think it's a bar that has an arcade in it. And a good time was had by all. The dress is a little heavy, and because it's black, it's probably not the coolest linen ever, but funnily enough, I found that the cotton areas were the areas that were warmest when I was walking from the car to wherever we were going. So, yeah, I didn't really see a problem with it. I'm not sure if I got the usual cell phone shot with the pockets, but considering I can probably stick a bottle of baby duck in each of these pockets, it's not a big deal. So the dress is a 10 out of 10. I have worn it and I will be wearing it again. It's just not a sundress, so you have to kind of pick your times to wear it. So while today is kind of toasty, yesterday was as well, and I got through the day without overheating, which is fantastic considering, as I said, this isn't a sundress. Plus, I'm also wearing leggings underneath here because, well, it's a medium length skirt. My legs are lumpy and bumpy because they haven't slimmed down and firmed up quite yet. And I like people, but not enough to shave my legs for them quite yet. I do love the combination of the fabrics, the cotton print and the black linen. It's a lot more unique than what I would find at one of the local stores, and about the only comparable things I've seen are places where they'd charge you like over $200 for it, like a linen naive. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to pay over $200 Canadian for something that's going to get cat hair all over it. I would rather pay the $30 to $50 at the local fabric depot to get the linen and then make the dress myself. It is really comfortable. I lounged around in it all yesterday evening, hence the cat hair. If the weather wasn't an issue, I'd probably be wearing this every day, I think. It's kind of giving me Stevie Nicks vibes, you know? And I really can't argue that is a cool look to be able to have, at least at my size. I definitely can see myself making it again, and I've got a whole lot of ideas for things I could do for this front piece. Like, could use a nice bright patterned cotton, or could do patchwork, smocking, embroidery, like another black dress with embroidery on it. Bright embroidery would be really cool. One of the things that I found recently going through one of the bookshelves over here was a whole bunch of Mum's pamphlets and booklets and magazines, and I didn't realize that she had quite a lot of smocking and quite a lot of embroidery. And I know she'd done embroidery when she was much, much younger, but by the time my brother and I were old enough to be roaming around the house, she was mostly doing cross-stitch and petty-point. But there's a couple of vintage books there with vintage transfers for doing embroidered designs, so I'm thinking what I might do is scan those and use a couple of them, possibly in a shirt or a blouse or a dress, and we'll see how that goes. But it was something that I hadn't really expected, and it kind of opens my mind to things that I could do with a dress like this. So I definitely will be making another one, probably farther down the line. But all that said, this is a great dress. I do love it. I highly recommend you giving it a try if you don't mind something that's not, you know, tailored to your body, that has a little bit of extra room and is just sort of a comfy everyday dress. But it does occur to me that I probably should be looking into a sundress, something with a slightly longer skirt and maybe something that I can toss a sweater over if it gets cold, or I don't want people to see my arms. So if you have any recommendations for sundresses that you think I'd like or that might look good on me, let me know.